What I wanted to talk to you about today is the presentation I gave to House Republicans at the retreat in Jacksonville about the task force that Leader McCarthy asked me to lead, the Jobs and Economy Task Force. What is different is this is traditionally a Ways and Means slot. The leader of this task force, and is disproportionately tax policy. It's like 90-10. 90% tax policy, 10% everything else, which is really what we've seen for an agenda for jobs in the economy for like basically the last 30 years, 40 years for Republicans. There's a lot more to what's happening in the economy that we have to respond to. So I want to give you a sort of a synopsis of what I told them and some of the reaction I got. First, we're in a different economy than what policymakers have experienced in their lifetimes. So the easiest touch point is 2008, 2009, where we have high unemployment. People leave their jobs and get a new job that pays them on average 17% less. Same job, 17% less. Now in this economy, you can walk across the street and on average make between 4 and 6% more. And that is really slow data. I mean, I think the current aspects of that are much higher. So this jobs market is different. Second, we have people moving between states. That's been the top line discussion. We've seen the stats, right? People are going to Florida because Florida is, open and crazy, and you can do whatever you want. And so you have this movement out of California to Texas, from New York to Florida. This is the top line. Well, that is only one piece of the puzzle. You also see rents increasing more quickly in suburbia and exurbia, which tells a different story. Rents are increasing more quickly in suburbia and exurbia than they are in urban areas. And that is because you have a rebalancing where people choose to live around lifestyle. That's enabled by work from home and gig work. And those are two sets of policies that Republicans need to get their minds around embracing. But that is a different job market. So you have a massive movement of people within states and between states. This will rate as one of the biggest migratory periods in American history. It will rate up there with post-World War II. It will rate up there to the Dust Bowl. It will rate up there with farm to movement to urban areas in the last part of last century, in the 19th century, last part of the 19th century. So this is a different labor market, and people are making different choices. And so we also have supply chain disruptions. And inflation like we've not seen in really 2 generations. We have inflation that is the highest we've seen since 1982. We have supply chain dislocations unlike we've seen since post-World War II, of taking a wartime economy and getting back to domestic life. And so what we've seen in post-World War II era is people purchasing more things at a massive scale than ever before. For the 5-year period after World War II, 1 out of 5 Americans purchased washing machines because it's the newest gadget around. And so they had massive shortages of washing machines. Well, did you try to order a new laptop in the last 2 years? Similar issues, right? So those are the basket of issues that we have to address. This is a little bit different than just giving you tax policy. We have 3 candidates running for Ways and Means chair. They're going to give you their agenda for how you handle the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so that will be left to them to go make the case that they're the leader to take that debate. And we're going to, not that we won't address tax reform, but we're going to allow them to handle the details of how they plan to segment it. So breaking this down, you have labor force issues. You have Republicans that are well positioned to be more nimble on workforce issues. That means a conservative answer to how we provide for child care in a more fulsome way than we currently have in society today, 1. 2, how we embrace gig work or the ability to be an independent contractor. This sets up nicely between Democrats having to be much more beholden to unions and therefore can't be as nimble on those issues. Then we also have a massive issue around individuals seeking jobs We have two issues there. One, we have 11.5 million unfilled jobs and 5 million people looking for it. We have 3 million people that are out of the workforce today from pre-COVID. So we've got to get people back into the workforce, one. And two, we have to connect them with skills and jobs. Now, there's a conservative solution there on workforce development, education, and training. And so we've got a very serious workforce answer. Supply chain. Everybody wants to talk about roads, bridges, ports. Well, that's not the totality of supply chains. 92% of the world's advanced semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. Why? Well, it's not because of cheap power. It's not because of tax incentives. It's because of brain power. So we have to think much more holistically around our trading relationships, around our tax policy, our regulatory policy to encourage people to manufacture here in the United States. That also means our trade policy needs to embrace our friends and allies around the world and connect them with us. Our trade agenda, traditional Republican trade agenda, is also very important when we talk about supply chains. Again, we have a ready-built conservative answer to the needs of society. Well, yada, 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 we'll get to the point. The biggest issue right now on voters' minds is inflation. Number one. If you're in power and you're presiding over inflation, sorry, tough to be you. When you were the party that spent more money, and that was a part of your agenda, and then you look around and wonder why inflation is occurring, well, you already owned it, right? And so the San Francisco Fed rated the American Rescue Plan, the $2 trillion that they spent in January of last year, as the key ignition, the key spark that ignited inflation. And it's not, like I have to tell you, the San Francisco Fed's not some right-wing organization. Janet Yellen formerly headed up the San Francisco Fed before being Fed chair. And so we have good markers to point the finger at the ones that actually did this. And what Biden is doing is trying to find the real killer, right? We're going to go search for the real killer. Well, it's this administration that has ignited this inflationary flame. And then they also have a very difficult time of answering gas prices, which is in people's minds linked with inflation. It's a separate set of circumstances. But you cannot be the decarbonization party and the decarbonization agenda driven by the administration and then say, well, it wasn't our fault that gas prices and energy prices are higher. It's a very complicated thing for them to answer. So we have a ready-built answer on inflation, which is traditional Republican answers here. It's sound money and fiscal discipline. Now, fiscal discipline is kind of the old-time religion of Republicans. Let me remind you, right? There was a guy named Paul Ryan who was all about fiscal discipline. May he rest in peace, wherever he is. But we have to return to those principles, even though it's been long forgotten by most members of the House Republican Conference. But it's fiscal discipline that is our answer to inflationary policies. So we have a ready-built answer there. So that is a helpful thing. But let me tell you why it's helpful. It's helpful in two ways. First, a legislative agenda is helpful to win the election. Yes. That means there's a counterpoint to just saying they're awful and we're not. To have an agenda is a useful and necessary thing, even in the midst of personality politics. Second, House Republicans unify around ideas much better than if we're not unified around ideas. If House Republicans have an agenda and things that we're fighting for, we're much like Marines at war. And if we don't have an agenda we're fighting for, we're much like Marines on leave. So it's important that we have an agenda so that we don't end up in jail or worse. So there you go. It's a useful endeavor, and I think Leader McCarthy did the right thing by putting these things together. And I think this will be instructive for the Majority Leader to start being able to pull these bills out of committee across 2 years. And I think that will be useful.